Hi everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoterica and the One I Feel Like It series, Retro Revamp Rewind, where I take a look at some of the earlier videos on my channel and re-review them because I've got a bigger audience now, and I want to hype this stuff up to the most amount of people possible. And today we're taking a look at Round Trip RV on the Hyper Neo Geo 64. It's one of 2 racing games available on the platform. Before I get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like, subscribe, and that notification bell definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below in the description as well. But when I first looked at the 2 racing games on the Hyper Neo Geo 64, I was slightly ambivalent towards them. And as I played them more because they are in my personal collection and this is running on real hardware, I've grown to like both games more. Now, Offbeat Racer is my preferred game out of the 2 racing games on this platform, and that's just down to the fact that it's a little bit more arcadey than Round Trip RV is. Round Trip RV seems more like it wants to really be a fundamental arcade racing game where the racing is the core mechanic and some of the, spectacle and jumps are lesser in there. Even saying that though, this is still a ton of fun to play, and as I played it more, learned some more of the shortcuts and gotten a better sense of the physics engine and how it controls, I've gotten better at this game and I've enjoyed it more. Because when I first bought my 2 Hyper Neo Geo 64 driving games, and I reviewed them for the first time on the channel about 2 years ago, I thought about actually selling them, but I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I gave them more time, because I was just expecting something out of them that they weren't. These aren't San Francisco Rush, these aren't Ridge Racer, these are SNK's 3D racing games, and once you understand what SNK was trying to do, they become much more fun. And the main hook of Round Trip RV is that every course is a round trip. A lap doubles back on itself, and at certain points in time you're going to be going head to head, just like that there where I traded paint, with a competitor as you're using the road to go in 2 different directions. And you'll see here at the beginning and end of the track, you need to make a full 180-degree turn in that hairpin. So the entire concept of Round Trip RV is that you are racing on the same bit of road against your opponents at any point in time. You could totally screw up and have a head-on impact and ruin your race. And once you understand that and get a little bit more fun and maybe play this game with 2 players, it's nigh impossible, but it can be done at home, you get a little better sense of what's going on here. And I love how the game looks. I love the Hyper Neo Geo 64 hardware. I get that it's not as good as something like Model 3 for the time and era it came out, but I think this is aged relatively gracefully, because this was definitely more powerful than the Saturns, Nintendo 64s, and PlayStation 1s of this same era. And once you take that whole package into account, the fun racing, understanding what the game is trying to be, knowing that this was SNK's first attempt at 3D, these games become really enjoyable and fun to play. Now, I will say of the 2 games, Round Trip RV is the much harder one to deal with because the audio is coming out of separate speakers that would have been in the cabinet chair piece when you're sitting in the driving seat, so I can't get all the audio. Some of this is mixed in. And the Hyper Neo Geo 64 cartridges can be very sensitive. This is what happens if one of the over 200 pins is dirty. Cleaning these things is a nightmare. I hated it. It took me 3 hours to fix this. It just seemed fun to show you a little bit of what the background story is on keeping all this old hardware alive, because let me tell you, 200 pins is a mess. But once you get it up and running and playing, it is spectacular. I modded a flight stick and a set of pedals to be able to play this game at home, and I'll leave the description and the link below, because you can get pretty much all arcade racing games operating in your house so long as they worked on potentiometers. But as good as this game looks, as fun as it is, I really like the soundtrack as well. Don't forget I did add this in editing. It's not native to the capture, but it is still a great tune. I'll be back in like 30-45 seconds and tell you more about why Round Trip RV is a better game than I initially assumed. But enjoy! It's a fun bit of music, but I don't know if it really makes sense. It's like a jungle theme along with some sci-fi vibes to it. I don't know what they're going for, but I like it, so it's fine. I mean, it fits the game, and I'm totally not worried about it whatsoever. But again, playing this more, I love the course layout. I will give SNK high marks for laying out some really good courses in Round Trip RV. The fact that everything's doubling back on itself, the fact that there's different jumps, that the path forks in two different directions and you have to choose which one you want, it does give you a decent amount of replayability and a lot of different fun. And as you can see in the backgrounds, there are all those buildings that are flying by. Absolutely everything in this game is polygonal. It's not really using any sprites or 2D background layers whatsoever outside of the skybox. And you have to give the Hyper Neo Geo 64 a lot of credit for what it could do as far as a 3D system was concerned, especially when you remember the AES and MVS are on the market at the exact same time. I even like that those rocks are there. They weren't there on the first lap. Laps will change, and what used to be safe will now be an obstruction. And having played this game multiple times, those obstructions don't occur on the exact same lap every single time. This game has some sort of RNG in it, where those boulders might be there in the first lap, and they might not be there in the second lap, or in this instance, they're there in the third lap. It does different things, and it always keeps you on your toes, so you can't 100% memorize what's going on. But again, I just needed to re-review these games and talk about them for two different reasons. One, the Hyper Neo Geo 64 got a lot more press after I did that series of videos, and I want more people to know about this now that I have a larger audience. And two, my opinion on it has changed, and that rarely happens. My opinion's usually cemented based on something, but when I captured these games and did the commentary the first time, I had only played them for maybe an hour a piece just because I had so much going on, so I just wanted to talk about them again. Because in my original video I even said that I felt like the sense of speed was lacking in places, and as I go back to it more, it definitely does here, but in the beginning it doesn't. It just seems like some of the polygons don't go past you quick enough to give you that sense of speed, but in other areas where there's not as much of a wall next to you, it feels a lot better speed-wise. And even the handling changes. When we're on snow here, the car loosens up a little bit, that back end wants to get out from you, and I do love the physics that are involved in this game engine. SNK, for never having handled 3D before, for never really even making many 2D racing games, I don't know if they licensed the physics engine or wrote it in-house, but they did a great job of making these cars handle as realistic as an arcade racing game ever could, which is to say, if you make a mistake, it feels like it's on you, not on the game. And that's all I can really ask for from any video game, is if I'm playing well, it's because I'm talented, and if I'm playing poorly, it's because I made a mistake. Round Trip RV never fights you, it never feels unfair, and once you learn the courses, being able to finish first or right up near first is going to be something that's easily achievable. And that's why I wanted to talk about this game again, because I've just had more of a chance to really play it, let the concepts marinate in my head, and to better understand what SNK was doing. And the real unfortunate part is I would have loved to see what else SNK did with the Hyper Neo Geo 64 had it succeeded at market and stayed alive longer, because this is one of 7 games in totality that were released on the Hyper Neo Geo 64, and these are all considered basically first-gen games. Round Trip RV and Offbeat Racer basically came out almost at the same time, and they were some of the first games in development for the hardware, so we have no idea what the Hyper Neo Geo 64 would have been capable of had we gotten later generation games, because the hardware just didn't last that long. And that's the most unfortunate part, is I can play a little alternate history with it and wonder what this would have looked like when developers had a full handle on the hardware versus just learning it, and I'm sure the SNK's SDK tools for 3D were probably pretty rudimentary as well, because they hadn't dealt in it that often. And you'll see there at the end of these courses, you need to basically do a 180. If you do it just well, it feels perfect. If you hit the wall like I did, you kind of make a mistake. But that's the fun part about Round Trip RV. There's a lot of good racing content here. The one thing I wish about the game is it came with more than 3 tracks, because if it had like 5 or 6, I think it would be a lot more appreciated. The odds of you ever seeing a Round Trip RV cabinet in arcades again is absolutely minimal. I haven't seen a Hyper Neo Geo cabinet since like 2006, so if you do see this game in arcades anywhere, definitely give it a shot. But leave me a comment down below if you ever played any of the Hyper Neo Geo 64 games. They do emulate and MAME, albeit poorly. Hopefully that improves over time. But short of that, do me a huge favor, hit like, subscribe, that notification bell, and we'll see you guys next time. It's game over. Bye-bye.